There he is, Mr. Class, Charlie Watts. Hi everybody, it's Jenn from McCree. 2021 seems to be the year of the rock and roll classics passing away of old age. First it was Rusty Young. Heck, I haven't even done my Paul Cotton video yet. I still haven't wrapped my head around that one. Now the first of the Stones is packing it in at the age of 80. That's a good life. And the guy was fairly happy and healthy, playing drums, going on tour as recently as 2019. He was the drummer, he was in the background, but he was immaculately dressed. The hair was always in perfect shape. He looked like he was a friggin' prime minister, or the president or something. And didn't show a lot of emotions, but whenever they would come out onto the stage, sometimes they would have what's called the B stage at the Rolling Stone shows. And when they're playing these huge venues, either like a hockey arena or a football stadium, they would set up a stage at the very back, and during the middle of the show they would actually walk them out to the back and they would play a couple songs on a small little stage there. And Charlie had a smile on his face every time he walked that aisle and was high-fiving just about everybody on the way out. So let's take a brief look down memory lane at the list of my Rolling Stones shows. And as you know my story, I grew up in the 80s but didn't really pay much attention to pop culture. But once I got into the mid-90s to the late 90s, I started discovering 70s music and 60s music, and I became in love with the genre. And big shout out to my friend Ray. I was over at Ray's apartment one night, I think it was 97 or 98, I can't remember. The Stones, Ray was a big Stones fan, and he's like, oh, there's the Stones on the radio. So I'm like, oh, turn it up. I hear this band. I've just been interested in the Eagles and Aerosmith and Kiss, and I knew the Rolling Stones were the greatest rock and roll band of all time, but at that point I'd never actually listened to any of their songs. So we turned the radio on, and I can't remember what they played, but Ray's like, you know what, they're coming into Toronto, they're coming in town, we should go get tickets. And I said, yeah. He's like, you got to see the Stones. I've seen them a couple times, and they're the best live band you'll ever see. So we grabbed our tickets, and the show ended up being postponed. But it eventually did happen. The Bridges to Babylon tour, we were up in the nosebleeds of the 500 level of the Sky Dome. But this stage setup was so huge, it didn't matter how far away you were. You could see everything, this big screen, and oh my goodness, the songs are amazing. The sound system, the backing band, they had backing singers, trumpets, trombones, and my oh my, Jagger is such an amazing frontman, and Keith with his guitar solos, Charlie in the back just drumming away. And the fans just went berserk, and I walked out of there. By then I knew some of their songs. I'd had like a week or two to get caught up on the Stones, so I went out to my used music store, and back then it was still cassettes. I think I bought Hot Rocks, the Rolling Stones' greatest hits, and listened to that every day for like 3 or 4 weeks. And it was 98, so the internet was new, but it was out there, so we were able to get the set list from some of the previous shows. So we had an idea of what we're going to see, but oh my god, this was one hell of a show. Fast forward a year later, and the Stones are they're actually going backward from the big stadium shows to the smaller arena shows. And they're like, it's not going to be quite as elaborate, but it's going to be closer and intimate. So somehow I managed to find a seat in like the 5th row for what was called the No Security Tour, in which they promised to play a lot more of their lesser known and obscure songs. And 5th row on the floor right in front of the Stones for 2 hours. Oh my god. That was enough to have me sold, if I wasn't already, that this is the best rock and roll band in the history of the world, and by far the greatest live show you will ever see. So they took a few years off, and then they came back for their 40th anniversary in 2002. They put out a compilation, greatest hits thing. I never buy greatest hits compilations, but I do own all the actual studio albums. And I think it was called 40 Licks. They picked like 36 songs from their career, and they wrote 4 new songs, so they were also touring on those. And this was even more unique. 3 separate types of shows. They were going to play stadiums, they were going to play arenas, and even a few small clubs. And by then the word had gotten out that the Rolling Stones always rehearse, for some reason, in Toronto, and there will always be the announcement at the last minute of a surprise secret gig at a very small club in Toronto. And they had literally played El Macambo one year with like 200 people in there. And I remember coming to work one morning. I was working with the Ontario government, and word broke out at 5 o'clock in the morning. The Rolling Stones were going to play a small show for $10 a ticket at Toronto's Palais Royal down by the CNE there. And by the time I got to work at 8:30, it was already too late. Somehow this leaked in Ohio, and 200 to 300 people from Ohio drove to Toronto to stand in line at 8 o'clock in the morning to get a wristband for the show. $10, you get in to see the Stones. I spent the day, sorry boss if you're watching, Diana, I think your name was, Diane, that was a long time ago. I spent the day trying to find a wristband on the internet, and someone offered me 500, said, you give me $500, I'll give you my wristband. But by the time I decided whether or not I was going to spend that kind of money, I'd missed out. But that's okay. They came back to Toronto, and they played twice in 3 days. So I went to see them in Detroit first, October 12th. Toronto, October 16th, Air Canada Centre, Toronto Skydome 2 days later. So that was quite the week. Detroit, I was on the floor about 40 rows back. You know I like a band when I'm willing to get into a car and drive several hours into another country to see them. Amazingly enough, I've seen the Stones 12 times, 6 in Toronto, 6 elsewhere. So when that tour ended in 2002, they said, we're going to add some more shows in 2003. So I'm like, great. Montreal and Pittsburgh, back-to-back shows. And Montreal is up in the upper deck of the new building there, the Molson Center. Don't know what they call it now. Bell Center, maybe. Then I drove right to Pittsburgh. Had a second row seat for a hockey game, Toronto Maple Leafs against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Then the next day, the Rolling Stones played Pittsburgh, and I sat 6th row for that show. And oh my goodness, that was perhaps even better than the previous show where I was sitting right down up front there. And for out of good measure, 2 weeks later, I was out to Chicago to see the United Center, and they played 2 shows there. Wow! Of course, then they went to Europe and had their big European tour 2003, and all of a sudden Toronto got this issue, public health crisis. Not quite as bad as COVID-19, but it was called SARS, and a lot of people got sick from it, and a lot of people died. The World Health Organization said Toronto was not safe, and they kept that unsafe label on way too long, and Toronto was starting to open up, and people were feeling more comfortable coming there. They said, we need a big event to attract tourists back to our city. So, of course, they called the Rolling Stones and said, I know you're in Europe, but if you could give us a day and come over here and headline this day-long festival we're planning, we'd really love you. So they said, sure, let's do it. Me living in Toronto, of course, this would be the time I was on vacation in Nova Scotia, but I said, there's no way I'm missing this. So I actually flew back home, got on a plane at 5 in the morning. Have I told this story already on one of my other videos? I'm not sure. 5 o'clock in the morning, I get on a plane in Halifax, fly to Toronto, take a bus to the Downsview Air Base, and walk in the door at 8 o'clock in the morning. This was literally a big open field, and all tickets were general admission. So First come, first serve. You got to get there early. So I got in the door around 8 o'clock in the morning, and there were already several thousands of people setting up like blankets and stuff. So you got to sit there for the whole day. I was just by myself, so I squeezed right up to the front and hung out with a big group of people who traveled from Argentina. Finally, around noon, the show got underway. There was like 18 opening acts. A lot of them were like, they started with like the locals, like the Canadian bands, the Toronto bands, and they had then towards the end of the night they started bringing out major acts for like 30-minute sets. We had Blue Rodeo, we had the Guess Who, we had Rush, and Justin Timberlake, poor guy, came out and he was pelted with garbage for most of his set. And then AC/DC came on, and oh my goodness, I went from the front row. The front row just turned into a mosh pit, and it was so... By then we had been standing there in the heat with very little water for 9 hours, and I had to take a few steps back because that mosh pit was just getting rough. But an hour and 15-minute set from AC/DC, unbelievable. They actually stole the show from the Stones, who would then come on and play a 90-minute set. Of course, I went straight back to the airport and flew back to finish my vacation. But I can say I was there. Molson Canadian Rocks Toronto, a.k.a. Sarstock. Estimated 475,000 people. The largest single-day ticketed concert in the history of Canada. Maybe even North America. They had more than Woodstock. I mean, this was unbelievable. Go look for the show, because it's on YouTube, professionally recorded, at least some of it. So anyways, the Stones took 2004 off to write some new material, and they put out a new album. And they came through the Sky Dome again, so I was there. And a year later, the tour was still going. So I went on one of my crazy driving trips. What did I have? 4 concerts and 2 football games in like a series of 3 or 4 nights. I remember driving down to Detroit, Ann Arbor. I saw Chris Hillman play a concert there. Then I went to see Notre Dame play a football game Saturday afternoon. Chris Hillman again Saturday night in Chicago. Sunday was on to Kansas City for an NFL game, and Sunday night it was into Wichita for the Rolling Stones. My last Rolling Stones concert, October 1st, 2006, at the Wichita Football Stadium. And I was like 75 rows up, but again, didn't matter. Unbelievable show. Of course, the next year I'd be moving to Newfoundland, and a long way away from anywhere the Stones have ever played, and it's hard to believe it's been that long since I've seen the Stones. This all seems like it was yesterday. So Charlie Watts, I never thought he'd go first. You'd think Mick or Keith, but I guess Mick's cleaned up his life. He's eating healthy and doing yoga. Keith, I don't know. I mean, he's not human. Charlie, I guess he did have some smoking and some alcohol earlier in his life, and that may have shortened his lifespan a bit, but I mean, the guy lived to be 80, so we can't complain, although it is a sad loss. And I just wanted to remember the Rolling Stones, and I love their music. I'm glad to hear that Mick, Keith, and Ronnie Wood, along with their backing bands, mates, are going to finish the tour that was interrupted by COVID. They've got 12 or 13 shows that they promised. Look, when this COVID's over, we're going to come out and play those cities. And they're all in the U.S., and it'll be different seeing someone behind the drum set that's not Charlie Watts, but I'm sure it'll be one hell of a show. I mean, Bill Wyman left the band in 89, and Daryl Jones came in 94, and he's been doing the bass thing for 27, 28 years. And, yeah, I've heard the ticket prices are ridiculous, but if you, by chance, can find your way into the stadium to go see a Rolling Stone concert live, it's a must-see. I never saw the Beatles. I wasn't even born when the Beatles said farewell. I never saw Led Zeppelin, but I just don't think anyone can put on a better live show than the Stones, whether it's in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 2021. So yeah, feeling a little sad, and I'm going to put my camera up here. Hope you can see. I have bobblehead dolls of Charlie Watts, Ronnie Wood, and Keith Richards is in the corner there. Mick Jagger. I bought these in Chicago in '03. They have not been opened except for the Charlie Watts one, which fell on the floor. But these guys will forever sit in my living room. And love your music, guys. And to all the Rolling Stone fans out there, especially to the, I guess, the family of Charlie and the bandmates, but just when you're a fan of a band, it's like you're all one big family. And no matter how well you know the band or not, or how many times you've seen them or not, I mean, we all love this music, and this music's been around for so long. And I'm sure the day's going to come that we're going to lose Mick, Keith, and Ronnie. Unless they live to be 150, I don't know. I'm 47, and I guess I'm just one of many younger people who got interested in this band much later into their career. I mean, their first records came out in '64, I think. And here I was coming along in '98 just discovering their music. It's like, my goodness. I think we'll be listening to them 500 years from now. They'll be listening to Rolling Stones music just like we're still listening to Mozart and Beethoven and all the classics. I'm going to stop rambling and put on some more music. But thank you, Charlie Watts, for an amazing contribution to the music industry. Many people will always love you and will never forget you.